Alright, welcome back, or welcome to the Tush Mahal. It's Tush coming at you, and we are continuing on the spring maintenance of my 1973 Triumph TR6. And I thought I would take a little bit of video this morning to anybody who's interested in taking off the intake and exhaust manifolds on their TR6. Now this is relatable also to the earlier TRs from the TR2 up through the TR4. The process is fairly similar. So I'm wanting to get my intake and exhaust manifold off the car. I, in particular, want to paint my exhaust manifold. You might be able to see some paint peeling down through there. So in order to get the exhaust manifold off, the intake manifold has to come off as well. And in particular, if you wanted to do some work on your carbs, for example, you want to do a little bit of carb rebuilding, or you need to replace a intake and exhaust gasket, for example, this is the process in order to be able to get your intake and exhaust off the car. So I thought I would take you along on the journey, as it might be helpful to some who've never done this before. So I've got a little GoPro set up here that we'll do some shots from, plus I've got the handheld here, so we'll get right to it. We'll talk a little bit about tools required. I think I've got pretty much what I need to get this job done. 1/4 inch open-ended wrench. We've got a 9/16 open-ended wrench. 1/2 inch open-ended wrench, in some cases ratcheting, although the ratcheting end wrenches don't work too well on this project. Pair of pliers. We've got some different length extensions from my ratchet, and we've got a 9/16 socket and a 1/2 inch socket here standing by, and some flat bladed screwdrivers. So here we go. Alright, the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to remove all of the rubber lines off of the intake manifold and carburetor. So any of the emissions lines, any of the fuel lines that you can see, the brake booster vacuum line, also some coolant lines for the line that runs through the intake manifold. Now be forewarned that these hoses may not come off very easily, and you may need replacements of these hoses afterwards. You may not be able to reutilize them because they can get glued to these manifolds, and you can destroy the hoses in the process of trying to get them off. Also be forewarned that if you're taking your exhaust and intake manifolds off the block, that you will need a new gasket for that. The gasket will not be reusable, so be forewarned that you need to have these parts ordered beforehand unless you want some significant downtime for your car. So let's go ahead and start removing some lines. I'm going to try to do this in real time without stopping and starting the camera. I may speed it up here a little bit in parts now and again, and may swap views from this camera to my GoPro. So anyway, stay tuned. We'll just go to it. May not be a lot of talking in some parts of this process, but anyway, I'll do the best I can. Alright, we're going to just start by moving the line from the valve cover, the rocker cover. I've got a couple of clamps here on the carb vents that I need to remove. Just loosen those clamps off. And if my head's in the way, I'm sorry. Those clamps are off. Just put that on the way. Alright, there's all the connections to the carbon canister off, and we'll just lay those over here out of the way. Here's the vacuum or the brake booster line's got to come off. There's a bit of a clamp here. If you guys happen to be using a vacuum gauge to time your car, I find this port is a good port to hook up your vacuum gauge to. We have the distributor vacuum line under the rear carb that we're going to disconnect. It's just a little fitting on the bottom, so just disconnect that. There's the fitting at the bottom of the carb. All right, and we'll just put this out of the way. Okay, let's do the coolant lines. The understanding we're going to probably lose a bit of coolant in the process. And again, with the understanding that these lines may not be reusable, I do have new hoses standing by if required. I find that if you're running the green hoses from the Roadster factory, I find that those degrade quite quickly, and those will generally tear when you try to get them off. I can feel this one wanting to tear. Alright, one done. This one will be a little bit more challenging. We're going to remove the little clip off of the bell crank for the gas pedal. Just have to pry it off with a screwdriver. I'll show you the clip in a minute once I get it off here. Alright, here's what that clip looks like that holds the accelerator rod to the carburetors onto your little bell crank, which hooks up to your gas pedal. So we'll just put that aside. This is a bit more room to access this one hose here at the back, so you can get a better handle on it. If you plan on changing your hoses anyway, you may just want to cut this off. A little easier. Okay. Well, we got it to rotate a little bit. All right, that hose is off. Then we're going to go after removing the choke cables. And these are these little, they're little spring clips on here at the top. And I'll show you those in a second. This is where that little 1/4-inch wrench comes into play, where your choke cables are attached to the chokes. We'll just undo the little lock nuts. It's got like a little trunnion fitting where the cable fits through. You will have to adjust these again once you reinstall your choke cables. Maybe we'll do a little video on that at a later date. And you just want to pull these little clips off. There's the clip that holds the cable to the carburetor. I don't know if you got it in focus there. Just a little clip like that. Put that with the accelerator shaft clip. Alright, and once those are removed, you should be able to remove your choke cables. Just pull them straight up and off. Some cases your cables might have a little small brass detent at the end. You may need to remove your little set screw or little locking set screw entirely to be able to get that little detent out. I'm just putting that screw back in here so I don't lose it. Alright, so choke cables are disconnected. So let's go after the fuel line connections. So we've got fuel line here at the front, fuel line to the rear car. We've just got our pair of pliers here. Just cut a couple of simple clamps. Actually, let's do the remaining emissions lines. There are 2 lines just on the rear of the carbs here. Again, these also go to the carbon canister. So there is no carbon canister on some of the earlier cars, but if you have a carbon canister, there are the lines you need to remove. Put those off to the side. We're going to remove the air cleaners. Probably not absolutely necessary. The only thing is it gives you much better access to get to the bolts underneath. So we'll just go ahead and we'll remove these. These are K&N filters. You may have a stock air filter box on here, or you may have some other style of aftermarket filter on here. Careful not to scratch your chrome or your paint. Some of these cars have been converted to either SUs or Webers. I should mention that obviously this is a North American TR6, so it's not fuel injected, it's carbureted obviously. The UK versions of the TR6 were petrol injected. One filter off. There are gaskets behind these filters. You may want to renew the gaskets if they're in poor condition. Don't drop your bolts out if you can help it. Alright, fuel lines next, and you can see them a little bit easier. We're going to get our pliers and just move that clamp back. I have an aftermarket stainless steel fuel line here. It may look a little different than the stock lines. Okay, again, these fuel lines, if they are suspect, if they are hardened and cracked, you may also want to replace your fuel lines. One quick note, I do actually have a fuel inline shutoff, so I probably will get a little bit of fuel out of here, but I shouldn't get much since the fuel inline is shut off. So there's the fuel lines disconnected. And now we can start going after the manifold bolts. Alright, we're going to attack the bolts underneath the intake manifold first. There are clamps on here. I call them butterfly style or football style clamps. Let me see if I can get you off the stand here and bring you down a little bit so you can see what I'm talking about. So there is a football style clamp that we're going to try and get to. There are 6 of them, and they hold the bottom of the intake manifold, and they also hold the exhaust manifold on. You need a 9/16 socket to get to those, and some of them you'll need an extension. After those bolts come off, there's 2 more bolts on the exterior of the exhaust manifold to get that off. So once you get those off, you're pretty close to getting both the intake and exhaust manifolds off. So we're going to get our 9/16 socket, and we're going to get an extension. I think we'll go with a single extension for the 2 outside bolts. all you're trying to do is just get yourself enough clearance to be able to get a ratchet in there and turn these bolts. Now, I had anti-seize on these, so they shouldn't be too difficult to get these off. I always put copper anti-seize on my intake and exhaust studs. Now, you may end up pulling the stud out, and that's okay. So we'll see if I get the nut off, or the, well, see this one, the entire stud came off, which is kind of to be expected. So let me just get rid of that. I'll show you what I'm talking about. So here's the stud with the football. These are brass nuts. We'll clean those up. And a little lock washer on there as well. So there will be 6 of these along the bottom. So we'll just put those somewhere safely. We'll need another towel here so we don't scratch our paint. We'll just put those down here. And we'll go after the next one. Now, if you've not done this before, you may have to feel around a little bit blindly. But if you've done a few of them, you can probably pretty much find these with a blindfold on. There's the next one. So the next one, you may want to add a shorter extension to your longer extension to make it a little easier for you to access that. So we'll do that. Shouldn't take too long to get your intake manifold off if you've had some practice, usually within 20 minutes or so I can get that off. The next ones, again, they're a little bit difficult because you're going through your throttle or your carburetor mechanism. It's not a bad idea to use a fender protector if you're worried about dropping tools. One more tool that can be useful is a magnet, and I'll show you why in a minute. For the most part, when you get the nut off, the footballs and the lock washer will not come with the nut, so I find it useful to use that magnet to go back in there and grab the football and the lock washer off the stud. Okay. Here's a good example of getting a magnet. I've got a couple different styles here. I've got just a telescoping one. Unfortunately, the magnet's not quite as strong as it is on this one. This is also a small telescoping one that's actually been broken off. And I'll try the telescoping one first. There's a nut there that I've dropped. So it's great for grabbing things that you have a difficulty in reaching. So there's one of the manifold nuts. And now we'll go after the lock washer. See if it holds it. And the football. And there you go, lock washer and football. So these magnets can come in very handy in this situation. All right, we'll continue on. This one in the middle, to the right of the middle, is probably the hardest one to get because your linkage for your carburetors is in the way. Okay. Drop the lock washer, drop the football, and on to the last two. Let me see if I can grab this football while I'm here. Okay. Okay, so all of the bottom nuts are off. The bottom nuts and lock washers and footballs are off the bottom. So that leaves us with three fasteners at the top here. These are 1/2 inch bolts along the top. So once you loosen those, that'll allow you to get your intake manifold off. So we've got our 1/2 inch open-ended wrench handy. We're going to do the two outsides first. We'll leave the center one till last, because the carburetors will tend to drop once you loosen these all off. So we'll leave the center one tight, and we'll remove the two exterior ones. And again, the stud might want to pull out, which makes it a little bit more difficult process. What will have to happen in order to be able to get this completely off now is I'm going to have to sort of move the intake out from the head in order to be able to pull that stud completely out. So we'll see how we do on this one. This one, the nut's coming off. All right, we're going to go after that center one. Now, if the carbs have been on here a while, they may be stuck quite solidly to the head gasket. These ones I can see it's separating already, so it doesn't look like it's going to be stuck on there. Let me just get this fastener off here. I've got one hand, as you can see the one hand, they're just steadying the carbs because they want to tip forward. As you can notice, I can already move these forward. So we'll remove that last nut. We'll get that lock washer. Alright, so we should be able to pull this stud out. Now we've got a little bit more clearance. So once the stud's out, if everything is disconnected, so that stud's out, everything is disconnected, you should be able to just lift these carburetors away carefully. So get a good grasp of them, lift them off the studs, clear your coolant hoses, and up and away they go. Okay, so I lied. There's actually 4 bolts left for the intake to get off. There's 2 outside ones and 2 in the center, and you can probably see why I wanted to get that exhaust manifold, not intake manifold, the exhaust manifold. You can probably see why I wanted to get that off of there. It's looking pretty crusty and needs another good coat of paint. So we'll go ahead and we'll use our 9/16 wrench to loosen those bolts. But the first thing we want to do before we do that is we want to attack. Let me see if I can take it off the stand. It's probably easier to try and undo the bolts down here that attach the pipes. So this is a 73, so it's a dual pipe configuration. If it's an earlier car, I think it's pre-72, has the single pipe. So anyway, this is a dual pipe. It's got 4 brass nuts here affixing that down pipe to the manifold. We'll attempt to remove those now. Excuse me, remove those now. Now often these can be seized on there. You might need a little bit of heat. They're a little bit difficult to get to, and in some cases you might find it easier to work from the bottom up to release those fasteners. But we'll go ahead and we'll attempt to do that now with a 9/16. I believe they're 9/16, either 9/16 or 5/8 open-ended wrench to get those off. I'm going to probably stop the camera here because you're not going to be able to see it anyway, but let me get those nuts off and then we'll come back to removing the manifold off the head. Alright guys, we are back. We have dropped the manifold to downpipe exhaust nut studs, and they are 5/8 inch brass nuts, and they can be a little difficult to get off, as mentioned. Fortunately, again, I used some copper anti-seize the last time I put these in there, probably about 10 years ago. And there is a gasket there. We'll show you that shortly. Anyway, I've detached the pipes from the exhaust manifold. Now, one handy tool that you'll probably require, and this will allow you to get 3 of the studs out, is a short stubby wrench, which will allow you to get this one out, and this one out. Now the one at the back here can be a problem, but if you have the car jacked up, you can get under there with a long extension and you can reach that without any issues. So for this front rear one, I suggest doing that from under the car and you won't have any issues, hopefully. Alright, we're going to remove these 4 nuts left on the exhaust manifold, and then we'll bring you back while we remove that. Oh, one more thing I should mention. If you wanted to leave your down pipes attached and you just disconnect them at the first connection to the mid pipes, if they aren't welded, in some cases a lot of people will weld that first joint, But if they aren't welded in, you can detach the pipes there. You can actually lift this manifold up with your short front pipe attached. You just have to maneuver it out. So that is another option for you. Now I'm dropping the entire exhaust off this car, so it doesn't really matter to me, but I could have actually done it by detaching that first attachment point and then pulling it up and out with those pipes attached. So that's another option for you to consider. Okay, the remaining nuts are 7/16. Just buzz those off. You can use an impact gun if you want to get these off, but I'm just kind of more of a hand tool guy. Yes, it takes longer. My time is free. Now, it goes without saying, be careful not to get clumsy and drop a lock washer or anything into the intake ports. May sound silly, but I've seen them ricochet and do strange things, so careful. This one wants to come out with a stud. It's okay. They do sell nice kits, I think, if you want to put all brand new studs and nuts. I did that on my TR250. So if you want to go the new stud and nut route, they are available as a kit, or you can buy them individually, of course. It's always nice to have a kit that includes everything. Alright, a couple of lock washers to remove. One here. One here. And of course, when we go to put this back on, it'll be all new lock washers at least. Alright, so that should be ready to come off now. We push that pipe down to clear. So that's clear down there. So it should be just a little slight upward pressure to break the seal on the gasket, and that should come right off. Let's give it a shot. There we go. All right. Okay, exhaust manifold off, and the last thing is, remember I mentioned your new gasket. There's the gasket that fits between the manifold, the exhaust manifold, and the downpipe. So I've got a new one of those. This one actually looks to be in pretty good shape, considering it's been in there for a while. But we'll be installing a new one. So that's it. That's the intake and exhaust manifolds removed. You can do what you want to do. There's a lot more space on this side of the engine. Maybe you want to do a little cleaning in there while you're at it. And clean up some paint. So yeah, you can also check your gasket, see if you think you had any leaks anywhere. Possible I might have had a little leak at the back here. You can sort of see where the black marks from the exhaust are kind of peeking out from the edge. So it's possible I might have had a little exhaust leak there. But for the most part, I think the rest of it looks pretty good. Maybe a little tiny leak there. Anyway, we've got a new gasket, so this one will hit the garbage bin. Alright guys, that's it for now. If I can do it, you can do it. Have fun. Well, before I go, I should just mention one more thing regarding the intake and exhaust gaskets. There are two different ones on the market depending on what year your car is. The earlier cars and the later cars had different intake port spacing, so make sure that you get a gasket that's matched for the intake that you have on the car. I don't always assume that the correct head is on the car, so you, for sure, once you order your gasket based on the belief of what your car is, make sure that you save your old gasket to compare the new versus old, just in case your car has undertaken a head swap at some point in its life. All right, that's all I have to say about that.